Hello, and now it's a pleasure for me to introduce Kinsey from TapNation, and he will tell us how to build a hit game, Sneaker Art, a deconstruction of the creative process. So, Kinsey, you're welcome.
Hello guys. I hope you are fine and you are enjoying this hyper casual game conference. So yeah, as Vlad said, we were going to deep dive into the creative process of sneaker art today, and how we make sneaker art become a hit. So it's really how to make a hit game from really the beginning to the end stage of your game, basically. So yeah, let me just give you the quick presentation. So sneaker art, that you know quite well, it's a game that we created and we released in 2020. It was like a major hit because everyone was crazy about the sneaker thing. So we really wanted to go back into this and see how really we provide this game to become a hit. So the beginning of the process, how we begin the sneaker art process. So you have to know that in TapNation, we have some brainstorming session on a weekly basis. This is something that we really identify as being useful for a hyper casual company rather than being on the publishing side or rather than being on the developing side, so the studio side. So we really think this ideation process is super important. So this is something that we put in place really early in the life of the company, and we started to make some ideation process like this. So then we have an in-house ideation process, and as we have many sneaker fans into the team, it was a no-brainer for us to get a game in the sneaker area. So this was the early stage of the process. So just giving random ideas about how to make a good sneaker game. On top of that, we analyzed the trends. So we went on YouTube and Instagram, for example, and we saw that there are different trends about customizing sneakers. You may have seen a lot of videos where people have a white shoes and then they are painting it with a little flower or little color of the lace, for example, or different thing on the shoes. So we say, okay, we identify the first thing that we had in our ideation process, the sneaker team, and then we get a bit deeper into the process itself. And when we identify those videos, we say, okay, we have something to do here. We're gonna make a video game, a hyper casual game about customizing your sneaker. So what happened after that is that we make some motion design and CTR tests. So we create a motion design from scratch that was not a video game at all, that we tested in CTR tests. So as you may know, guys, the CTR tests are quite informative for us because it gave us an approximate potential of the game, if the game has potential on the marketability side. So this is what we did at first. We had a really good CPC. The CPC was really, really smooth. And then for sure, the CTR as well was really nice. A CTR of more than 10%, which was super awesome. But based into that, we were just having a concept. Then this concept, this motion design went into prototyping. So we pitched the concept to a studio with the GDD and the motion design attached so that we can start building a game, basically. So what's the first step of sneaker art? So basically, after a few weeks, the studio that we worked with, they come back with a game really similar to what you had in front of you. So the game was a plain 2D game where you had to draw your sneaker and color your sneaker with different color palettes, with the match screen over there. that you have on the top left and left corner of your screen, with the little shop button to improve the background, and then the shop to add more shoes, to paints, and to draw, basically. So there was a first positive things like on those games. Things first, when we tested the CPI, we had a CPI of less than 20 cents, which is super great for the benchmark of this industry. We took the Ice Cream Inc. core gameplay. When I say core gameplay, I'm not saying about holding button and stuff, but overall theme of the game, meaning matching an exact color that you have into a matchbox, and also the palette of color that will be here, so that you can select your different color, so that you can match your example. And on top of that, we had the same thing that in Ice Cream Inc., where you had to upgrade your background so that you can have more and more background that you can buy with the in-game money, in-game currency, basically. So this was the good thing with 2D assets and side view of the shoes, as you can see. However, on the first prototype aspect, we saw that it was very unsatisfying for users, because people were staying, people were churning a lot. In fact, we had less 25% day one retention, which wasn't enough at all to pursue and having this game to become a hit game. So progression was not like well balanced. There were lacking some content into the game, and I think the main point is the game was unsatisfying. In fact, you didn't have like many VFX and cool particle where you were painting the shoes. It was kind of flat, if I can say like this. So when we had this first prototype and we saw the first stats, we say, okay, we have something because the CPI is great, but we have to think a bit deeper on that game. So this is what we did. We come back to the core game and we start to iterate with the studio. We say, okay, how can we make this game get the good CPI or even decrease it and improve the retention? So we discuss a lot with the studio and with our internal team, and we get to the second part, the second iteration of sneaker art. The second part, we identify a gameplay that were good and that were having a good retention. It was Pimp My Car, where it was a car spinning in 360, where you have to spray your car with a color, with a paint. So we say, okay, we have this pistol that can release some paints. We can adapt this to the shoes. So we put this gameplay with a 360 spinning shoes. Here we went from a 2D model side view from a 3D model that were spinning completely. So that was the first main difference. Of course, we did improve the graphics of the game. We build some more cool things and bring more satisfaction to the game. Here, we add some little particle with little VFX when you were spraying the shoes, and the gameplay and the overall vision of the game was smoother than the one before. At least that was the main objective. With this version, so as I said, we took the Pimp My Car core gameplay, and as the gameplay were quite smoother and more satisfying, we increased the day one that we have of the base day one by 30%. So there was an increase of 30% of the day one of the first version of the game, which was cool, but not enough to get a really, really good version of the game. However, on the negative side of it, the 3D asset with the spinning shoes were less interesting on the UA side to the users, meaning like the CPI rose from the base that we had, the CPI rose from 50%, which was like a lot, because of course, when you already have a good CPI of less than 20 cents and you rose by 50%, it's something that you will definitely lose the CPI with this version. And then the progression was not well balanced still, because we had more satisfying thing, more like VFX, more particle, but at the end, we lacked this satisfaction into the core gameplay. So we went back into the iteration process. because here again, we were thinking we have to think as this concept as a whole concept. So we went back to the first version and we say, what were the things that people were liking into the very first version, and what was the thing that the people liked into the second version? So we went back into this version after 3 weeks of iteration. So it was not a major, it was not a super like easy iteration. It was 3 weeks for the base, and then we built on 2 weeks after to have like a final game. So it took around 1 month to take this final iteration. On this final iteration, what did we analyze? We analyzed that the first game with the side view were having a better CPI overall. So we decided to retake the 3D asset from the second version, but put it in side view. So we had 3D asset and side view model on the latest version. We added a new progression system linked to the idle system, meaning that each time you were having a shoes that you are crafting, these shoes would appear into the shelves right there, like you are in a store, like a store of a shoe store, basically. On top of that, we added new gameplay, because here it was very important for us to think, as I said earlier, the gameplay as a whole. We thought, okay, when you are buying a shoes, as a customer, what are you doing? First, let's say you want to customize your shoes. You are customizing it, but at the end, you have to try it and to lace it. So we think maybe this gameplay about lacing a shoes can be interesting. So after customizing your shoes, we added a gameplay where you had to lace your shoes like a little puzzle, but super easy to do. And then we go from that. And on top of that, we add another thing that were kind of a no-brainer when you think about it a bit deeper. When you buy a shoes, the employee are putting it into a box for you, because at the end, your shoes will end up in a box. So that's why we did. We say, okay, we have to paint the shoes, which will be our main gameplay. And on top of that, we will put the lace part and putting the shoes into the box part. So here we added new gameplay to bring a bit more like deepness and things to do basically into the game. So as I said, we added the idle system, where as soon as your shoes will be on the shelves, it will give you some idle income, because it was important for us to make really feel the user that they are like collecting some shoes, and that they can actually see the shoes that they collected on the shelves, because that's a thing that all sneaker fan like, is when they have a shelves with a lot of shoes displayed on it. So we go from that. Of course, we added and improving the controls. We added some VFX and little particle paint streak that were growing from the brush outside of the shoes. And we smoothed the control so that it can bring much more satisfaction to the overall product. Of course, here, it's a game about content, because you have to get a lot of shoes to paint to this kind of game. So that's why we produce multiple of assets, a lot of shoes, so that people can have different shoes to custom and to customize. Because at the end, this game is for sneaker fan, but also for the crowd. And we thought that we have to get different shoes that are a bit look alike to the real life model, and also a big variety of shoes, because some people like, for example, Vans, Nike, or Adidas, or whatever. So we wanted to make a big variety of shoes into this game. So after going to this whole and big iteration of 1 month, as I told you, we get back a CPI that were even lower to the beginning. So we went back to a CPI lower than 20 cents. That was like for sure a benchmark. And we rose our base D1 by 100%. So the retention doubled from what we had in the beginning. So then we have everything that was in place to launch this game, all the KPI were in the green zone, thanks to the creation and ideation process and the iteration process that we made on this game. So just to go further, I will just get back on the real iteration process of this game. So you see, the game started from there, a very plain 2D side view game with no satisfying aspects. From that, with a good CPI but a bad retention because of the lack of satisfaction and the lack of content and content to the game. Then we add a little more satisfaction to the game and little more content, but it's impacted the CPI on a negative aspect. And then we take this the knowledge of those two concepts to add a final concept which were like really good at the end. And here, for sure, we had the CPI and the D1 that improved a lot on these games. So that's really the main process, the main like stage that went from our side on the sneaker art game. So if I want to get back on what we learned and what I think is a really good thing to learn from this case, so for sure you have to understand that each step of the creative process is super important. In fact, on the first stage, we have a very good CPI, but a very low retention. And the thing here, as soon as you have a game like this with a very good KPI, you have to understand what is the part that pleases to the users. If you have a game with a very good CPI, you can say, okay, the visual aspects, the overall theme of the game, the genre of the game, there is something that is catching up the audience and that will be good for the overall sake of the game. The same thing goes for the retention side. If you have a very strong retention, it means that your game has a really good progression system, really good meta, really good satisfaction when the player are playing it, because it means that the player, they are coming back on the game and there is something that hooked them to the game. So even though there is a part that is a bit less interesting, this is what happened, for example, on the second iteration of Sneaker Art. We saw that the CPI rose a lot, but we did manage to apprehend the 3D part, the 3D aspects, and the overall progression of the game that was good, that rose the retention. So then what we did is we took each part of each step that were good to the game and we plugged them into a wall. So that's the second point also. You have to think about the concept as a whole. Here we had a sneaker game. So we were thinking what all the sneaker fan wants, what a sneaker fan would like to add into this game. It's not only like, okay, I'm making a sneaker game, so you will just have to paint your shoes. No, you have to think the whole process about what people will much likely look and look like and like into this game, basically. So you have really to think the concept as a whole. And from our side, it was about bringing the painting part, the lacing part, which was making sense with the shoes, then putting into the box, it's also a no-brainer, and put your shoes on the shelves that will be displayed as it is, because it's a thing that every sneaker fan like, basically. So those, the concept makes sense to the users. So the same thing, when you think the concept as a whole, you have to think that each little step that I'm putting into the game, each little gameplay that I put into the game has to make sense. In our case, the lacing part makes sense. The putting the shoes into a box makes sense. Putting the shoes into a shelves to make idle income, it makes sense. So you have to think your concept, does it feel genuine to the users so that they can do this specific action? Also, when you identify a good CPI, you have to iterate on the concept. In fact, in this market, CPI is a thing that is always super hard to reach. So you really want to focus on your CPI. So your CPI will really like drive you. And when you identify it, especially a CPI of less than 20 cents, you have to iterate. Don't let this idea go. Of course, you want to spend 6 months on a game like this, but you want to really think about this CPI and then really build around it. So really think about this, about the CPI. And a much important thing as well is don't hesitate to start building from scratch. For example, you have a good CPI, you identify a good thing. But when I go back into the first version of the game that we had, it was cool. Yes, we had a good CPI, but the project was, how can I say that, kind of rotten to the core, basically. So we get a start from scratch. We erase everything and we say, okay, this is the few things that were important for the game. And then we build a game completely from scratch. Because sometimes you can be stuck into the creative process, like because you are, for example, you started the code this way, the structure of gameplay this way, and it's hard to make it evolve into the future. So sometimes it's better to erase everything and just get back from what you had in the beginning, meaning the good CPI, and then you iterate on that and you create something that will be a much better version at finally. So that would be my key element and the key aspect for me when you have this kind of game. Don't let it go and always think as a concept as a whole. Each step of the creative process is important. Think is the concept, if the concept makes sense to user or not. Iterate on a good CPI and don't hesitate to start building again from scratch when you identify a good game. So that's it for the overall presentation of sneaker art and the creative process of sneaker art. I think right now we can go to the Q&A session, basically.
Yes, Kinsey, you're right. So for now, we have a question. Have you had any problems with the legal side because your shoes models are close to real Nike, Adidas, etc.?
That's a good question, actually. So no, we make sure to reproduce like models that are really look alike, but that are not using the actual brand. For example, if I go back quickly on the slide that I have, you see that here we add the logo Nike, but this one for just for custom build for the creatives and the advertising, but we get rid of it super fast at some point. So you just have to make sure that your shoes is similar enough to a real life shoes, but not to, I mean, your shoes, like your product overall. When you have a game like this, make sure, for example, if you make a game about like customizing, for example, iPhone or Huawei or anything, make sure you have a phone looking like the iPhone, but that is not displaying the logo, for example. So that's about it.
Okay, thank you. The next one. Did you improve the monetization of your game at the same time as you were iterating on the CPI?
So this is something that we did really on the end parts of the latest version of the third version. So for at the beginning we had the first and the second version. As the KPI were not in the good shape, we did wanted to improve the overall game before. And when we identify a good project, a good thing, then we start adding the monetization system. But this is something that we thought from the beginning, before the third iteration. We already thought about how we could add some advertising into the game, some rewarded mechanic, so that people can take some shoes and everything. So even though you don't add it in the very beginning of the process, you already have to think about it for how you will build your game, basically.
Thank you. Could you please tell us a little about your failed games too, and on what point you left them?
So specifically about sneaker or in any failed game, basically.
Any games, any other games of your studio? I
Yeah.
think.
So the thing is, yes, it's a good question because Sneaker is a case where we succeed basically to get the iteration process, but sometimes it doesn't happen. So when it comes to the failed game, is you have to analyze, as we did with Sneaker, each step, each thing that will be useful to you. You have to analyze why the game is not getting, for example, a good CPI, why the game is not getting a good retention, for example. Then you do the same process. You iterate on it, you iterate on it. But at some point, it happened that sometime you will see maybe after 2 months or 3 months of iteration, either your game will not improve, so you will stay at your remaining base and stats. For example, let's say 25% day one retention and 35 cents CPI. So it means maybe this game as a whole doesn't have the potential enough to be a hit game basically. So at some point it can be your core gameplay that is not good, or at some point what can happen is when you iterate a lot on a project, you can see that the CPI will start to rise a bit by the time. So this is many factors like this that you cannot completely control, because, for example, if there is another game that is taking a lot of audience, then your CPI will maybe rise. So you have to just iterate a lot. But when you think that maybe after 2-3 iterations the game is going nowhere, then in fact you will have to drop it at some point.
Okay, and the next question maybe expands the previous one. How many game ideas did you fail with before this hit?
So it's a good question, because at the end, here at TapNation, we test around 80 to 100 games per month. So for sure, about like on top of those games, we have like the concept on CTR that we test and stuff. So I would say it's maybe one success for maybe 100 or 200 tests, I would say. So you see that this number is quite low, but we do provide like some support to the teams to try to reduce these numbers by giving some game pitch that are already proven on the market, some CTR tests and everything, so that we can like drive the studio to already interesting idea, I would say, and concept.
Okay, what kind of tools do you use to study trends on social media?
Basically, it's super straightforward here. It's Instagram, YouTube. Like, if you guys are quite on the social media, I think you might seen some trends like a lot. For example, like we had many trends like in the past, like for example, soap cutting. This game, it was a trend about cutting the soap like this. It was a trend. So you just open your YouTube, you go on trending video, you scroll, and then when you identify a thing that is going crazy, you say, okay, maybe there is something I can do here. Basically, that's super straightforward.
Okay, how much of an impact does an art style makes on CPI, like low poly, toonish, polygonal, pixelated, etc.?
So, you can repeat the question, please?
Sure. How much of an impact does an art style makes on CPI, like low poly, toonish, polygonal, pixelated, etc.? So
So, how much it's impact the CPI? That's it?
yeah. Art style was
I mean,
dependent.
yeah, I mean, here it's a good question. It's a bit hard to reply to this one, to give a proper answer, I would say, because it will really depend on your game at the end. You can have a game that is a cartoony, like voxel, low poly, pixel art, that will be really good. And you can have a game that is really similar with like much more realistic graphics that will have a big chance on the market. For example, if you compare two games, I think it was a recent game named Rush Hour 3D, and there is a game not so long ago before. It was like Overtake. The two games are basically the same. You just have to overtake some cars like this on the traffic. one are in cartoony style, one are in realistic style. So it really depends, and you just have to identify the trend, because maybe 2-3 years ago it was about 2D style, and now we are much more into 3D and realistic. So it's just about identifying the trend and try different art style for your game, basically.
Okay, I think we have even more questions, and the rest of them Kinsey easily can answer in a public chat. So I think, thank you so much. It was really interesting and really detailed. And I think we will write back to you in a few moments with the next speech. Thank you again.
Okay, thanks guys, bye bye.